"Pretend you're my date tonight," he whispered voice, calm yet trembling like a secret, trying not to break. The sound of rain slid down the glass walls of the Soho bar, each drop reflecting amber light from the whiskey shelves. Lila Anderson looked up from the counter, her hand still on the towel she had been using to wipe the glass. For a moment she thought she misheard him. The man before her looked completely out of place. Tailored suit jaw, set like stone blue eyes, too controlled to be casual. The kind of man who never begged anyone for anything, and yet he had. Outside, the flash of cameras lit the windows. Paparazzi again. She'd seen them around before when actors came through. But this man wasn't an actor. The logo pin on his lapel, silver and subtle, belonged to Ward Technologies. Lila's pulse skipped. Alexander Ward, the billionaire whose face had filled every newsfeed last week when his engagement to a senator's daughter collapsed overnight. Now he was here, wet hair undone tie, and eyes that carried too many stories. "Please," he said again, quieter now. Just for a few minutes. She blinked, glanced toward the door where camera lenses glinted through the rain. Her manager whispered, "That's him? God, that's really him." In one breath she made a decision. "Fine," she murmured, grabbing her coat and stepping out from behind the counter. She walked toward him, keeping her voice steady. "You're late," she said loudly enough for the cameras to catch. He looked at her startled, then understanding dawned. His hand brushed her arm, a fleeting touch, but charged with intent. "Sorry, traffic," he replied, matching her tone. The paparazzi lights burst like fireworks as he placed his hand on the small of her back and guided her toward the door. The rain hit her face as they stepped outside, flashes exploding, voices shouting questions. She forced a smile, pretending she belonged in his world for a few seconds longer than she should have. The moment they turned the corner, he released her arm. The city noise filled the silence between them. "Thank you," he said, his breath visible in the cold. "You didn't have to." "Apparently I did," she replied, heart racing. "You looked like a man about to drown." He gave a short laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "You just saved me from a headline I couldn't afford." She folded her arms, rain dripping from her sleeves. "And what headline will this be?" "Tomorrow, bartender saves billionaire." He hesitated, then smiled faintly. Could be worse. His driver pulled up sleek, black-tinted windows. He turned to her again. "Can I give you a ride home?" She shook her head. "You've done enough damage for one night." He looked like he might argue, but instead, he simply nodded. "Then thank you, Miss Anderson," she said. "Lila Anderson." "Lila." He repeated softly, like tasting the word. "I won't forget that." He stepped into the car, and within seconds he was gone. Only the reflection of the taillights remained, stretching like red threads across wet asphalt. Lila stood there, rain seeping into her shoes, half wondering if she had just done something incredibly stupid or strangely fateful. She didn't know that the next morning her face would be everywhere. The headline on the morning news blared, "Billionaire Alexander Ward caught with mystery woman." The clip of them leaving the bar played on every screen, his hand on her back, her soft smile, the chemistry that wasn't supposed to exist. Millions of views, thousands of comments. Who is she? She's not his fiancée, gold digger, or maybe real love. By the time she reached her apartment, her phone was buzzing nonstop. Texts from coworkers, classmates, even her mother. She silenced it all, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her face looked the same, tired eyes, damp hair, but the world had changed overnight. Somewhere across town, Alexander watched the same video from his office window. He should have been furious, but instead, he felt something strange relief, maybe even curiosity. The woman who saved him from the cameras had looked at him differently. Not like a billionaire, not like a scandal, but like a man who needed saving. He wondered if she knew that in pretending for him, she had unknowingly begun the one story that would change them both. And Lila, standing in her small apartment with the hum of city traffic below, whispered to herself, "What did I just get pulled into?" Neither of them knew yet that the lie they told that night would become the only truth they could never escape. The video of that night looped endlessly across social media like an echo that refused to die. By sunrise, her name had leaked. Someone from the bar sold her information to a gossip site. Lila Anderson, bartender, 27, working-class background, living in a rent-controlled apartment in Queens. The comments poured in fast, gold digger. She planned it, classic PR stunt. By the time she arrived for her evening shift, her manager met her at the door, face pale. "Corporate called," he said softly. "They don't want the attention. I have to let you go." He looked guilty, but guilt didn't pay rent. She walked out into the cold, her breath visible in the neon light, her phone vibrating with messages she didn't want to read. One stood out, a number she didn't recognize, but the name above it made her stomach twist. Alexander Ward. She ignored it, but a black car appeared minutes later, window lowering to reveal him. "Get in," he said simply. She hesitated, then climbed in, too exhausted to argue. Inside, the silence hummed like tension. "You lost your job," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." She folded her arms. "You're not the one who fired me, but I'm the reason you were on that screen." She glanced at him. "And why exactly are you here? To fix your PR mess?" He shook his head. "To fix what I broke." He slid an envelope across the seat, thick, heavy. She didn't open it. "What is this compensation?" he said. "For the trouble." Her jaw tightened. "You think you can buy my silence?" "No," he replied, "just your forgiveness." She stared out the window, city lights streaking past like fragments of another life. "You rich people are all the same," she murmured. "You think the world bends when you throw money at it." He sighed. "I don't want to bend the world, Lila. I just want to survive it." Something in his tone disarmed her, a crack of sincerity beneath the arrogance. Still, she handed the envelope back. "Keep it," she said. "I don't want your money." He studied her for a long moment, then tucked it away. "You're not like the others. That's the nicest insult I've ever received." A flicker of a smile crossed his lips. "I need your help," he said suddenly. Not like before. Something real this time. She raised an eyebrow. "You've got some nerve." "My company is merging with a European conglomerate in 3 weeks," he explained. "The deal depends on my image, stable, responsible, trustworthy. You appearing in those photos, it complicates things, but it also gives me a chance to lie better," she said dryly. "A chance to control the narrative," he corrected. "If we pretend to be together publicly, it stabilizes everything." Lila laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So you want me to fake date you to save your billion-dollar empire?" He nodded. 3 weeks. I'll pay you generously." She shook her head, ready to tell him off, but the word hospital flickered in her mind. Her mother's dialysis bills, the calls she'd been avoiding. How generous, she asked cautiously. He mentioned a number that made her heart stutter. Enough to pay off the medical debt, maybe even start over. Still, pride burned in her throat. "I'm not for sale." "I know," he said softly. "That's why I trust you." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside the city rolled by in silver streaks of rain and light. 3 weeks, she said finally, and one condition. He met her gaze. Name it. You treat me like a human being. No contracts, no PR scripts, no control. He nodded. Agreed. The next day, a stylist arrived at her apartment with boxes of dresses and shoes. Lila refused most of it until she found one simple black dress, elegant but understated. The stylist smiled. He said you'd pick that one. That evening, a sleek car waited for her downstairs. Inside, Alexander looked different, composed again, back in control. But when he saw her, something in his expression softened. You look, he began, then stopped. Appropriate, she teased. Perfect, he finished. The car glided toward the skyline. She stared out at the lights, wondering when pretending had become so heavy. When they arrived at the event, cameras already swarmed. Alexander stepped out first, then extended a hand toward her. She hesitated, then took it. The crowd erupted in flashes. He leaned close, whispering, "Just breathe. You're doing fine." Her smile looked effortless, but her heart raced like a drum. Side music drifted, champagne glasses clinked, and people whispered as they passed. Is that her? She's beautiful, but she's not his type. Maybe she's real. The words stung more than she expected. Alexander noticed and pressed her hand lightly. Ignore them, he said. You're here because I asked you to be. No, she replied quietly. I'm here because you needed me to be. Hours later, as the night ended, he walked her to the car. The street shimmered from the Rain City lights, reflecting in puddles. You did well, he said. I should be thanking you. Don't, she murmured. I didn't do it for you. He nodded slowly. I know. When the car drove away, she exhaled for the first time all night. Pretending was supposed to be simple, just a roll a mask. But somewhere between the flashbulbs and his steady voice, she had felt something uncomfortably real. That night, she hung the black dress carefully in her closet, unaware that her life had just split into 2 timelines, the one before Alexander Ward and the one after. And across the city, he stood at his penthouse window, phone buzzing with congratulatory texts from his board, but all he could see was her face under the rain light. He whispered to the empty room, I don't know why, but I trust you. The words hung in the air like a promise neither of them was ready to keep. The marble steps of the Metropolitan Museum gleamed under spotlights as guests in black gowns and tuxedos swept inside. Lila had never felt so exposed. Every flash of a camera felt like lightning. Every whisper another cut she pretended not to feel. Alexander stood beside her calm as stone, his hand a reassuring weight at her back. He leaned closer and said quietly, Remember, you're not pretending to be perfect, only to be mine. She managed a faint smile, even though her pulse raced. Inside, the air smelled of champagne and power. A jazz quartet played near the entrance. Chandeliers dripped with light. For a girl who grew up counting tips to pay rent, it felt like another planet. People turned when they entered. Some smiled politely, others smirked. One woman whispered too loudly, "That's the bartender," and laughter followed. Lila straightened her shoulders and whispered, "Do I pass your test yet?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "You don't have to prove anything to them." "Easy for you to say," she murmured. "You were born into the spotlight. And you," he said, "were born to survive it." For a heartbeat, something soft flickered between them before a public relations assistant hurried up. "Mr. Wardpress wants a photo by the sculpture." He nodded, then looked at Lila. "Come with me." Cameras clicked as they posed beside a bronze statue. His hand brushed hers the briefest touch, but it sent a current through her veins. He smiled for the crowd, whispering without moving his lips. "You're doing great," she whispered back. "So are you for someone who hates pretending." He laughed quietly, genuine this time, and for a moment it felt like they were the only two people there. The rest of the night blurred into polished faces and hollow compliments. During the charity auction, Lila slipped away to catch her breath. She stood near the grand staircase, watching people lift glasses filled with bubbles they hadn't earned. A small crash broke her thoughts. A tray of desserts had fallen. Near the corner, a young boy about 7 sat on the floor, tears welling as a crowd of adults stepped around him. Lila knelt without hesitation. "Hey, you're okay," she said gently, picking up a scattered cupcake. "Did you hurt yourself?" The boy shook his head, embarrassed. She noticed the logo on his badge, Ward Technologies family program. Probably his father worked for Alexander's company. "You're brave, sweetheart," she said, wiping frosting from his sleeve. "Accidents happen even to superheroes." The boy giggled through his tears. When she helped him stand, she felt someone watching. Turning, she saw Alexander across the room, eyes fixed on her with an expression she couldn't quite name. He walked over the crowd, parting instinctively for him. "Is everything all right?" he asked. The boy nodded shyly. Alexander knelt, meeting the child's eyes. "That's a solid recovery," he said warmly. "If only my team handled crises that well." Lila smiled despite herself. The boy laughed, then ran off toward his father. Alexander stood hands in pockets, studying her. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. "Neither did you when you came to my bar," she replied. His lips twitched. Fair point. The air between them thickened something fragile and real. She stepped back, trying to break it. "You should go back to your people, Mr. Ward." "They're not my people," he said quietly. "Not tonight." Before she could respond, a woman approached a reporter with perfect hair and sharper eyes. "Alexander, who's your lovely guest?" she asked, smiling at Lila, like a predator. "I'm Lila Anderson," Lila said evenly, before he could speak. The reporter raised an eyebrow. "Ah, the mystery woman. There are rumors you two met at a bar. How charmingly unconventional." Alexander's tone cooled. "I don't comment on rumors." But the reporter pressed. "Is this serious or another of your temporary distractions?" Lila felt heat rise in her cheeks. She expected him to deflect or laugh it off, but instead he took her hand gently and said, "It's real enough to matter." The cameras flashed again. The reporter's smile faltered. Lila looked up at him surprised. He didn't look like he was pretending. Later, as the evening ended, they stood on the museum steps, city lights shimmering below. "You didn't have to say that," she murmured. "It was the truth," he replied. "At least the part I understand. And what part is that?" "That tonight I didn't feel like I was performing." She exhaled slowly, unsure what to say. His sincerity terrified her more than his fame ever could. A car pulled up, and as she turned to leave, he stopped her with a question. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Depends," she said. "When was the last time you trusted someone enough to let them help you?" She blinked. "I don't need help. Everyone does," he said, "even me." For a moment the rain began again, soft and cold. She looked at him and saw the loneliness under his control, the exhaustion behind the charm. "Good night, Alexander," she whispered, stepping into the car. He watched her leave, the taillights fading into the mist. Back in his penthouse, he replayed the evening in his mind, the way she spoke to the boy, the fire in her eyes. the way she didn't flinch from truth. In a world built on image, she was dangerously real. Lila returned home, slipped off the black heels, and stared at her reflection in the window. The city glowed behind her, endless and indifferent. She touched the glass and whispered, "He's not supposed to look at me like that." But deep down, she already knew something had shifted. The line between pretending and feeling had blurred, and the lie that began to protect them was slowly becoming the only truth either of them wanted to believe. The following weeks unfolded like scenes from a movie Lila had never auditioned for. She and Alexander were photographed at art shows, charity dinners, rooftop events where champagne cost more than her rent. Each appearance blurred the line between acting and existing. What began as a contract of convenience started to pulse with something unspoken. They spent hours together, rehearsing polite smiles for the public. But it was in the in-between moments that something changed. One evening during a business trip to San Francisco, their plane was delayed by a storm. Stuck in the terminal, he removed his tie and sighed. "So much for control," he said, leaning back in his seat. She smiled. "Maybe the world's reminding you you're human." "That's debatable," he replied. "My board calls me a machine." "Maybe you are," she said, "but you still bleed right." He looked at her startled, then laughed a real laugh, this time low and warm. They ordered pizza from the airport cafe and ate it from the box sitting on the floor near the window. He watched her fold napkins neatly afterward and said softly, "You make chaos look manageable." She shrugged. "That's what survival looks like." When the flight finally departed, he let her take the window seat. At 30,000 feet, she fell asleep, her head tipping toward him. For the first time in years, he didn't move away. He just watched the clouds reflecting on her face. The city lights far below fading into darkness. Back in New York, rumors grew. Some said she was the reason Alexander seemed softer, more human. Others claimed she was the latest in a long line of distractions. Lila ignored the noise. But one night after a corporate meeting, he invited her to the rooftop of his office building. The city stretched beneath them, endless and alive. Wind tugged at her hair. "This view," she whispered, "it makes everything look small." "That's the trick," he said quietly. "From up here, problems look distant, but they're still there when you come down." She turned to him. "Is that why you built your world so high above everyone else? To stay away from the mess?" He hesitated. "Maybe. Or maybe I just didn't know how to face it." His voice changed lower, more vulnerable. "My mother died in one of the first ward tech hospitals. A software malfunction delayed an alert to her doctor. We fixed it later, but not in time for her." Lila's chest tightened. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That's why I built the medical division," he continued, "to make sure it never happens again. But the higher I climbed, the more I lost sight of the reason I started." She looked at him for a long moment before saying, "You can't fix the world by pretending to be someone else." He smiled faintly. "You sound like my conscience." "Maybe that's because no one else dares to tell you the truth." The wind carried silence between them, not heavy but intimate. Then the first drops of rain began to fall. "We should go inside," she said, but he didn't move. "Stay," he whispered, "just for a moment." The rain thickened soft at first, then relentless. They stood there soaked, laughing despite themselves. And then without planning, without permission, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't the kind of kiss that belonged in tabloids. It was quiet, hesitant, like testing a door that might finally open. When they pulled apart breathless, she whispered, Someone's going to see. He looked down at her eyes glinting. Let them. The next morning the photo was everywhere. The kiss under the rain, the billionaire and the bartender. 50 million views, hundreds of headlines. Fake romance or true scandal. The internet exploded with theories. His PR team called it a disaster. His board called it reckless. But Alexander didn't care. For the first time, he didn't issue a statement, didn't deny anything. He just stayed silent. Lila, on the other hand, felt her world spin. Reporters camped outside her building. Strangers shouted her name in the street. "This isn't what I agreed to," she told him over the phone, voice shaking. "I can't live like this." "I'll fix it," he said. "You can't fix everything," she snapped. "Not this." There was a pause, then his voice softened. "You're right. I can't, but I don't regret it." She hung up before her heart could betray her. That night she walked along the river, trying to quiet her thoughts. The city glowed across the water, and for the first time, she wondered if maybe the lie they had built was no longer protecting them, it was trapping them. Somewhere above those lights, Alexander sat alone in his glass penthouse, watching the same city she was staring at. His assistant entered quietly. "Mr. Ward, the merger documents are ready. All we need is your approval." Alexander didn't look away from the window. "Not yet," he said. "There's something I need to understand first." He thought of her words on the rooftop. You can't fix the world by pretending to be someone else. Maybe she was right. Maybe the only thing more dangerous than losing control was never having it to begin with. And somewhere deep down, as the rain returned and thunder rolled over the city, both of them felt the same thing, that pretending wasn't the problem anymore. Feeling was. The night of the Ward Tech Charity Gala arrived with the kind of anticipation that made the city hum. Every major investor, politician, and socialite in Manhattan filled the ballroom at the Grand Astoria Hotel. Reporters lined the red carpet, waiting for a glimpse of the man who had turned a startup into an empire. But no one expected the woman who stepped out of the car beside him. Lila's red dress shimmered like firelight against the black-suited crowd. She wasn't dripping in diamonds or flaunting designer logos, just a single silver bracelet on her wrist, subtle real. When Alexander offered his arm, she hesitated, then took it, and the crowd rippled with whispers. "That's her, the bartender. She cleans up well." "Do you think it's serious?" Flashbulbs exploded as they entered. Inside, a string quartet played softly beneath chandeliers that looked like falling stars. The air smelled of roses and ambition. Lila tried to breathe through the pressure in her chest. Alexander leaned close. "Just look at me," he whispered. "Ignore the rest." She nodded, though her hands trembled. For hours they smiled, shook hands, and posed for photos. He introduced her to people who looked through her rather than at her. "Alexander, who's your charming date tonight? Lila Anderson," he replied smoothly every time, as if her name were already carved into the marble of his world. But as the night deepened, she began to notice the exhaustion behind his perfect composure. The way his smiles faltered when no one was watching, the way his eyes followed the stage rather than the people around him. When dinner ended, he took her hand and led her to the ballroom floor as the lights dimmed. The first notes of "At Last" drifted through the room. She froze. "Oh no," she whispered. "What is it?" he asked. "My mother used to say, a real man only asks for a dance when he's ready to tell the truth." He smiled faintly. "Then I guess it's time." He drew her close, and the crowd parted instinctively, eyes following the billionaire and the woman who had somehow silenced his chaos. They moved slowly, her hand resting against his shoulder, his other hand steady at her back. The music wrapped around them like silk. "You make me believe I still have a soul," he murmured. She looked up at him, startled by the sincerity in his tone. "Then don't lose it trying to save your company," she said softly. For a moment he stopped moving. Their eyes locked the world, spinning quietly around them. "You think that's what I'm doing?" he asked. "I think you're trying to fix something that isn't broken the way you think it is." "And what do you think I'm fixing?" "Yourself," she whispered. He exhaled a sound between laughter and pain. "Maybe you're right. In that moment, it wasn't about headlines or wealth. It was two people standing in the ruins of their own defenses." He rested his forehead against hers just briefly, and the camera flashes captured it like poetry. The crowd erupted in polite applause, but neither of them noticed. "Every dance has an ending," he said quietly. She just didn't know. Theirs was tonight. Across the room near the fireplace, an older woman watched with eyes sharp as glass. Margaret Graham, widow of one of Ward Tech's earliest patients, whose death had been quietly buried under corporate jargon. Her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "So this is the girl," she murmured to the man beside her, a journalist from the New York Ledger. "Yes," he said, "and she's very good for his image." "We'll see," she replied. "The truth always finds the light." Back on the dance floor, the song ended, but Alexander didn't let go. "Stay," he whispered. "Just for this song that isn't ours." She nodded, unsure why she suddenly felt afraid. The night blurred into toasts and speeches, but a tension hovered over everything. As Alexander took the stage to thank the guests, Lila stood near the side watching him speak. He looked every bit the man the world admired, controlled, magnetic, flawless. Yet when his gaze found hers, his voice faltered for a split second, barely noticeable to anyone else but her. He finished with polite applause, then disappeared into a crowd of investors. Lila turned to leave her heels, echoing against the marble. "Leaving already," a voice said behind her. Margaret Graham stood there, elegant in navy silk, her diamond brooch glinting beneath the chandelier. "Mrs. Graham," Lila said, unsure how she knew her name. "I've heard about you," Margaret said. "The woman who tamed the wolf." "I don't know what you've heard, but you seem kind." Margaret interrupted gently. "Be careful, my dear. Men like Alexander don't ask for redemption until they're drowning in guilt." Lila frowned. "What guilt?" The woman smiled sadly. "The kind money can't wash away." Before Lila could respond, someone called Margaret's name, and she drifted back into the crowd like smoke. Lila stood there unsettled. Later, when she found Alexander again, he looked distracted, lost in conversation with two board members. "Everything all right?" she asked when they finally stepped outside, into the cool night. "Fine," he said too quickly. "You sure are just tired." But his eyes betrayed him. He was hiding something, something that had nothing to do with business. He opened the car door for her, and as she stepped in, he caught her hand, his voice low. "Thank you for tonight." "You don't have to thank me," she said. "Yes, I do. You made me feel human again." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe there's hope for you yet." He closed the door and watched the car pull away. Her reflection vanishing behind tinted glass. The city lights blurred, and for the first time, Alexander felt something shift inside him. A strange sense that the life he had built so carefully was about to unravel. Somewhere deep down, Lila felt it too, though she couldn't name it. Beneath the glamour, beneath the whispers and the applause, The real story was beginning to breathe. The morning after the gala, the world woke up to more than just glittering headlines about the billionaire and his mysterious date. It woke to war. Every major news outlet flashed the same story: Ward Tech scandal. Explodes whistleblower reveals hidden death reports. Margaret Graham's name led the story. She had released a set of classified documents showing Ward Tech had once suppressed data about a faulty implant device responsible for multiple deaths, including her husband's. And one of those victims, buried among the list of names, was a man Lila knew better than anyone: her father, Samuel Anderson. She froze when she saw it on the TV in her apartment, her hands trembling as her mother's photo frame fell from the shelf. "No," she whispered. "No, it can't be." But the details matched: hospital date, cause of death. Her father hadn't died of a heart condition as she'd been told. The device had failed to alert doctors on time. The name of the product glared back at her: Ward Tech VitalSync 1. Developed, patented, and approved under the leadership of Alexander Ward. Her knees buckled. By afternoon, reporters gathered outside her building, again shouting questions. "Did you know about your father's connection to Ward Tech? Are you still seeing Alexander Ward? Was this all a setup?" The air felt suffocating. Her phone rang nonstop, but she didn't answer, until finally one call came from him. "Lila." His voice broke through the chaos, rough and urgent. "You've seen the news. You think she snapped. You lied to me." "I didn't know," he said quickly. "Not about him. I swear to you I didn't know." "Your company killed my father, and you didn't know," she shouted. Silence hung between them, louder than anger. "Let me explain," he said, desperate. "Not over the phone." "There's nothing to explain," she said, voice shaking. "You built your empire over his grave." She hung up before he could say more. That night she packed a bag and left her apartment, ignoring the swarm of reporters outside. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay. Meanwhile, Alexander's world was collapsing from within. His board called an emergency meeting. "You hid data that led to patient deaths," one member hissed. "You'll step down or face charges." "We didn't hide anything," Alexander said, voice low but steady. "The project predates my tenure." "But you signed off on the continued manufacturing," another said. "That makes you complicit." He looked down at his hands, the weight of every decision crushing him. "Suspend production immediately," he ordered. "Full cooperation with federal inquiry. You'll lose the merger they warned." "Then I lose it," he replied. "We should have lost it the moment people did." For the first time in his career, Alexander Ward felt powerless. But beneath the despair was something stronger, a spark of conscience that refused to die. Still, his reputation was ruined overnight. Stock prices plummeted, investors fled, and the same media that once called him a visionary now branded him a criminal. Lila stayed hidden for days. She ignored calls from friends, from journalists, from him. She only resurfaced when the hospital called about her mother. The dialysis center had suspended treatment. Her insurance coverage was canceled after the scandal broke. "Please," she begged the receptionist, "she can't miss a session." "I'm sorry," the woman said. "Until your coverage is reinstated, there's nothing we can do." She walked out into the rain, numb. Then a nurse caught her by the arm. "Someone paid for her treatment privately," she whispered. "Full cost in advance." Lila froze. Who the nurse only handed her a card: Ward Technologies Charitable Division. "He did this." Lila muttered, tears welling up. "He's trying to buy his way out of guilt." That night she went to the hospital alone, sitting beside her sleeping mother. "You always said forgiveness was strength," she whispered. But what if forgiving him means betraying Dad? Her mother stirred faintly but didn't wake. Across town, Alexander stood in his office, staring at the city he no longer owned. His reflection in the glass looked older, heavier. He opened a locked drawer and took out an old leather folder. Inside was a faded photo, his mother smiling, in a hospital gown the day before she died. "I started this to save people," he whispered, "and somehow I became the thing I hated." His assistant knocked softly. "The press conference is set for tomorrow." "Cancel it," he said. "I'm not ready to talk. Not until I find her." He left the building unnoticed for the first time in years. He found Lila 2 days later at a small cafe near the river, sitting alone, staring into a cup she hadn't touched. She didn't look up when he approached. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Neither should you," he replied quietly. She stood ready to leave, but he stepped into her path. "Please, 5 minutes. You had years," she snapped. "Years to know what your company did." "I wasn't the man I am now," he said softly. "That's the problem," she whispered. "You still don't understand. You can't undo what's done." "No," he said, "but I can atone for it." She met his gaze for the first time, and the pain in his eyes startled her. "You think paying hospital bills fixes it?" she asked. "You think donating money erases death?" "No," he said, "but silence keeps killing. I won't be silent anymore." She wanted to hate him, but the conviction in his voice made it impossible. Still, her anger shielded her heart. "You're lucky, Alexander. You can confess and still go home to your penthouse. People like my father died trying to pay for medicine your company made unaffordable." He lowered his head. "You're right." He reached into his coat and placed a folded letter on the table. "Tomorrow I'll tell the world everything. No lawyers, no PR, just truth. But I needed you to hear it first." "Why me?" "Because I need you to know I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said quietly. "I just want to stop lying." She didn't touch the letter. "Do whatever you have to, but don't do it for me." "I'm not," he said. "I'm doing it because of you." She turned and walked out, tears burning her eyes. He didn't follow. That night the city slept uneasy. The headlines were relentless. Anonymous sources leaked word that the CEO might resign, that he was preparing a public confession. In her small apartment, Lila finally opened the letter he left. It wasn't an apology. It was a copy of an internal memo. He had uncovered the one that proved the original cover-up happened before his leadership. At the bottom, his handwriting read, "Truth matters more than survival. Tomorrow I'll prove it." She pressed the paper to her chest, sobbing quietly. In another part of the city, Alexander stood on his balcony. Rain falling again, the same rhythm as the night they first met. He whispered into the wind, "For the first time, I don't care if I lose everything." Down below, the city lights shimmered like tiny witnesses waiting for morning, waiting for the truth to burn everything clean. Alexander left New York before dawn, driving north on an empty highway, leaving behind the flashing lights, the reporters, the empire that had turned into a cage. The letter he'd given Lila was already circulating online, leaked by someone inside his own company, but he didn't care anymore. For the first time, he wasn't running from scandal, he was running toward the truth. He didn't know what he hoped to find, only that the past had finally demanded its debt. The town where Lila grew up sat along a quiet river in upstate New York, surrounded by woods that looked silver under morning mist. He stopped at a gas station, asked for directions. "To St. Jude's Community Clinic," the place listed in his mother's old medical file, the same hospital where the first ward tech devices had been tested. The old clerk squinted at him. "You're not from around here." "No," Alexander said. "Just passing through?" The man pointed toward a narrow road. "Clinic's barely running these days, but you'll find what you're looking for if you're brave enough." The clinic stood at the edge of the forest, half boarded up, the sign rusted letters faded. Inside, dust floated through broken sunlight. In one of the old offices, a small plaque still read, "Dr. Peter Holden." Alexander knocked anyway, not expecting an answer, but a voice came from within. "Doors open." An old man with white hair sat behind a desk stacked with medical journals. "You're late," the doctor said without looking up. "Late?" Alexander repeated, confused. "I've been expecting someone from Ward Tech for years," the man said. "But never thought it would be you." Alexander stepped closer. "You know who I am." The doctor smiled faintly. "Hard not to after the headlines. You look just like your mother." The words hit him like a soft blow. "You knew her, I treated her," the doctor said. "She was kind. Believed in what your company was doing before it lost its way." He stood and poured coffee into 2 cracked mugs. "But you're not here for nostalgia. You're here for absolution." "I'm here for answers," Alexander said quietly. The doctor nodded slowly. "Then you should hear the story from the beginning." He walked to a filing cabinet, pulled out a folder yellowed by time. Inside were photos, reports, handwritten notes. 10 years ago, a teenage boy crashed his motorcycle near the bridge on Route 6. Severe leg fracture, internal bleeding. He would have died if not for a girl who stopped to help. Alexander's breath caught. "What girl?" Her name was Lila Anderson, the doctor said, glancing up. She was 17, walking home from her part-time job. She tore her shirt to make a tourniquet and stayed with the boy until the ambulance arrived. He was in shock, kept asking her name. She told him and disappeared before anyone could thank her. Alexander felt the room tilt. "That boy," he whispered, "was me." The doctor looked at him closely. "Then it seems the past has been waiting for you both." Alexander sank into a chair, his hands trembling. "I remember the crash. I remember her voice telling me not to close my eyes. But I never knew she saved your life," the doctor said gently. "And years later, the technology you created saved thousands more. But the company that bore your name forgot why it existed." Alexander stared at the folder, the old blood-stained police report, the words "rescued by unidentified female." He pulled a small leather wallet from his pocket, one he'd carried since he was 17. From it he took a torn scrap of red fabric edges, frayed but clean. "She gave me this," he said. "I kept it." The doctor smiled sadly. "Seems you've carried her kindness longer than you realized." Outside rain began to fall again, soft and steady. "You can't rewrite what happened," the doctor said, "but you can decide what happens next." Alexander nodded slowly. "Then I'll start by telling the truth." That evening he drove to the Anderson family home, a small house with peeling paint and a porch light that flickered against the storm. Lila's mother answered the door, frail but alert. "Mrs. Anderson," he said quietly, removing his hat. "I'm Alexander Ward." Her eyes narrowed. "I know who you are." "I came to apologize," he said. "Not for the company, for the pain." "You think saying sorry brings him back?" she asked sharply. "No," he said, voice breaking. "But it might bring peace." She studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." He wouldn't have wanted hate to rot what's left. Inside the living room smelled of tea and old books. Photos lined the mantel. Lila as a child, her parents smiling beside her. "She doesn't know you're here," Mrs. Anderson said, handing him a mug. "She blames you for everything." "She should," he said softly. "I blamed myself long before she did." They sat in silence until she said Samuel believed in your company once. Said it would change medicine. He would have forgiven you, you know. He always thought people could learn to do better. "Then I'll try to prove him right," Alexander said. When he left, the rain had stopped. He drove back toward the city headlights, cutting through fog. He stopped at the bridge where the accident happened. The guardrail still bore a dent, faint but visible. He got out and stood at the edge, staring down at the river below, hearing echoes of a girl's voice from a decade ago, telling him, "Hold on, help is coming." He whispered, "You were my help." The next morning, he arrived in New York with a new clarity. He called his lawyer and said, "I'm stepping down." Effective immediately. Alexander, think about this. "I have," he said. "I'm done pretending to be a savior. I just want to be honest." He spent the rest of the day writing letters, one to the victims' families, one to his employees, and one to Lila, the longest of all. He didn't send it yet. Instead, he walked to the press office of the New York Ledger. Margaret Graham was there waiting. "You came to finish what I started?" she asked. "No," he said. "I came to own what I destroyed." She studied him skeptical. "You expect forgiveness?" "No," he said. "Just the chance to stop hiding." She hesitated, then handed him a folder. "You'll find peace and truth, but it will cost you everything. Then it's worth it." When he left the building, reporters swarmed, shouting questions, cameras flashing. He didn't speak. That night, he walked along the river, where he had once almost died. The moon shimmered over the water, the city skyline glowing faintly. He reached into his coat and unfolded the red fabric. The rain had cleaned the air, and for the first time in 10 years he felt light. He whispered to the wind, "Lila, I remember." Across town, she stood by her mother's hospital bed, exhausted, lost, still angry, but unsure at whom. Her phone buzzed a news alert, "Alexander Ward, to make public confession tomorrow. Sources say he will dismantle Ward Tech." She read it twice, her heart pounding. "He's really doing it," she whispered. Her mother's stirred voice, weak but steady. "Sometimes people break before they're reborn, honey. Maybe he's one of them." Lila looked out the window, where the rain had started again. Her reflection shimmering over the glass. She didn't know if she could forgive him, but for the first time, she wanted to understand him. And somewhere between the storm and the silence, she began to realize that ghosts don't always haunt to hurt. They come back to remind us what we once saved and what we still can. The day of the press conference dawned gray and heavy, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Outside the Ward Tech headquarters, hundreds of reporters crowded the plaza. Their cameras already aimed at the glass doors. Testers lined the barricades, holding signs that read, "Justice for the victims and truth over power." Side, Alexander stood in front of a mirror, his tie undone, his eyes hollow but steady. His assistant hovered nervously near the door. "They're waiting," she said. "Let them." He slipped the red fabric into his breast pocket, the same piece of Lila's torn shirt he had kept for 10 years. It wasn't luck he needed today. It was courage. When he finally stepped into the conference hall, the room fell silent. The man who once commanded boardrooms with confidence now looked stripped bare, but something in that honesty drew every gaze. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice low but clear. "I built Ward Tech to save lives, but in the pursuit of growth, we lost our way. And people paid the price. Murmurs rippled through the audience. I didn't know the full extent until recently, he continued. But ignorance isn't innocence. I take responsibility for the harm caused under my leadership. Effective today, I'm resigning as CEO and transferring all company assets to an independent trust that will compensate the victims and rebuild the integrity we destroyed. Gasps filled the room. Reporters shouted questions, Mr. Ward, are you admitting guilt? Will you face prosecution? Why now? He raised a hand, silencing them. Because redemption is the only luxury worth owning, he said, and it's one I intend to earn, not buy. Cameras flashed like lightning. His statement streamed alive to millions. The stock price plummeted within minutes, but none of it mattered. For once, he wasn't calculating loss. He was choosing conscience. Outside rain began to fall again, soft but relentless. As he left the building, protesters stopped shouting. Some clapped quietly, unsure why they felt moved by the man they came to condemn. Across the city, in her mother's hospital room, Lila watched the broadcast. Her chest tightened as he spoke, as the words she never thought she'd hear fell from his lips. He did it, she whispered, tears welling up. He actually did it. Her mother smiled faintly. Good men make mistakes. Great men admit them. But not everyone saw it that way. Within hours, the corporate board filed a civil suit against him for breach of fiduciary duty. His legal team begged him to fight, but he refused. I'm done hiding behind money, he said. Let them take everything, if that's what justice costs. By nightfall, the Ward Tech logo was being taken down from the building. Reporters called it the fall of a giant. He called it the beginning of truth. That evening, he drove alone to the same bridge where his accident happened years ago. The storm had returned, wind-howling water, rushing violently below. He parked, stepped out, and walked to the railing. You built an empire on this spot, he whispered to himself, but it started with a girl who didn't let you die. Lightning flashed, and for a moment, he imagined seeing her 17, standing barefoot in the rain, hair plastered to her face, eyes full of courage. He closed his eyes. I remember, he said softly, and I'm still trying to be worth saving. Behind him, a car stopped. He didn't turn until he heard her voice. You picked a hell of a place for a confession. Lila stood under an umbrella, her coat soaked at the edges. How did you find me? He asked quietly. You're not hard to find when the whole world's watching, she said. I saw your speech. And you kept your promise, she said. You told the truth. He nodded, unsure if that mattered. I didn't do it for forgiveness. Good, she said. Because you're not getting it yet? She stepped closer, rain catching in her lashes. But you did something I didn't think was possible. You made me believe people can change. He looked at her, a faint smile breaking through. That's enough for me. She studied him, her voice gentler now. What will you do next? I'm going to rebuild what I broke, he said. Not the company, something better. She nodded, then do it right this time. They stood in silence as thunder rolled above. For a moment, the years between them, the lies, the pain, the history dissolved into the rain. He reached into his pocket and handed her the red fabric. I think this belongs to you. She looked at it, trembling slightly. You kept this. It was the only proof I ever had that kindness existed, he said. Now I need you to take it back. I don't deserve it anymore. She closed her fingers around it, feeling the weight of memory. Maybe not, but maybe one day you will. Their eyes met, and the world fell away. Then she turned and walked toward her car, leaving him standing in the storm. As she drove off, he whispered into the wind, "I will." The next morning, newspapers called him the billionaire who chose conscience. Some called him foolish, others brave. But for those who had lost loved ones to WordTech's failures, it was the first time they felt seen. Lila read every headline, but kept her silence. She wasn't ready to forgive him, not yet, but she couldn't hate him anymore either. Because when he stood in front of the world and burned everything he'd built, she saw the boy from 10 years ago, the one she'd pulled from the wreckage, finally saving himself. And somewhere deep in her chest, hope began to stir again, quiet but alive. 1 year later, the city looked different. Not because its skyline had changed, but because the shadow that once hung over it had finally lifted. Where the glass tower of WordTech once gleamed coldly, against the horizon, a new sign now stood, the Red Thread Foundation. The name wasn't chosen for marketing or legacy. It was chosen because of the fabric that had once saved a boy's life and later a man's soul. The foundation's mission was simple: to fund free healthcare access for families affected by corporate negligence and medical debt. But behind its clean logo and humble offices in Brooklyn, it was more than a charity. It was an act of penance, and Lila Anderson was the woman running it. Every morning she arrived before sunrise, her coffee still steaming as she reviewed case files and grant proposals. Her hair was shorter now, her eyes calmer, but her purpose sharper than ever. She worked not to erase her past, but to build something good from it. Most days she didn't think about Alexander, at least not aloud. His name rarely came up publicly anymore. After the press conference, he had disappeared from the spotlight entirely. Rumors said he'd moved overseas, living quietly, teaching business ethics at a small university under a different name. Others whispered he still lived in the city, funding the foundation anonymously. She never confirmed either. She told herself it didn't matter. But on quiet afternoons, when she looked out the foundation's front window at the street full of hopeful faces, she would catch herself wondering if he ever looked at the same sky. That day the hall buzzed with excitement. The foundation's first anniversary celebration was underway. Patients, volunteers, and former WardTech employees gathered in the modest atrium decorated with white lilies and red ribbons, symbolizing connection, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Lila stood at the podium, speaking softly but firmly. "A year ago, this place didn't exist," she said. "A year ago, truth felt like a wound that would never close. But today we're here together because wounds can heal, and sometimes they leave something stronger than what was broken." The audience applauded, some with tears in their eyes. Behind them, cameras flashed. The press had been invited, but Lila wasn't there for headlines. She was there for the families who now had medicine, surgeries, and hope. As the applause quieted, the lights dimmed slightly. A technician signaled her from the back, whispering that there was a surprise announcement scheduled by one of the major donors. Who, she asked, but the technician only shrugged. The house lights faded further, and the screen behind her flickered to life. At first, it showed only a landscape, the same river where everything had begun. Then a voice filled the room. "When I was 17, I almost died on that river road," it said. Every head turned toward the sound. The voice was unmistakable. Lila froze. "I was saved by someone who didn't ask my name, didn't ask for anything in return. I spent years trying to repay that kindness in all the wrong ways. I built something powerful but not good. I used her mercy as my excuse to hide behind success. It took me a decade to realize that the only thing worth building is what helps others stand when they fall." The screen cut to live footage. Alexander Ward, standing in the back of the hall. No suit, no entourage, no spotlight. Just a man in a dark sweater sleeves, rolled hands, trembling slightly as he spoke into a small microphone. "You once saved my life, Lila," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Let me spend the rest of mine saving others with you." A hush fell over the room. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the city outside. Then she stepped down from the stage, the crowd parting instinctively. She stopped in front of him. "You came back," she whispered. "I never really left," he said. "I've been here, just not where you could see me." Her throat tightened. "Why now?" "Because I wanted to come back as the man you believed I could be," he said. "Not the one I used to be." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, resting on soft velvet, was the same piece of red fabric, now mended with careful stitches forming a heart. Below it, embroidered in clean, steady letters, were the words, "Found you again." She covered her mouth, tears spilling before she could stop them. "You kept it all this time. It kept me," he said simply. "Through every storm, every loss, it reminded me that redemption isn't something we're given. It's something we live." She touched the fabric, her fingers tracing the stitched heart. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's real," he said. "Just like you. Just like what we built here." Around them, cameras clicked softly, but no one interrupted. The moment didn't belong to the press. It belonged to two people who had found their way through fire and somehow come out whole. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "Then don't say anything," he replied. "Just promise me this: don't stop doing what you're doing, because it's everything I couldn't." "We're doing it," she corrected gently. "You gave this place life." He shook his head. "No, I only gave it a name. You gave it a soul." She looked up at him, her heart twisting in that familiar, impossible way. "So what happens now?" He smiled faintly. "Now we build together, slowly, honestly, no pretending this time." "You mean that with everything I have left." She reached out, took his hand, and for the first time didn't pull away. The crowd erupted into applause, not because they were a spectacle, but because they were proof that people could fall, burn, and still rise again. Later that evening, when the hall emptied, Lila stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker like distant constellations. Alexander joined her, silent for a long while. "You know," he said, "finally I thought redemption would feel like peace, but it feels more like work." She smiled softly. "That's because peace is earned, not given." He nodded, glancing at her. "You still keep your father's photo on your desk every day," she said. "It reminds me why we're here." "Does it still hurt?" "Always," she said, "but now it hurts with purpose." He took her hand again, lacing his fingers through hers. "Then maybe that's what healing really is. Not the absence of pain, but the decision to carry it together." She looked at him, the glow from the city reflecting in her eyes, and for the first time since that night at the bar, she felt something shift, a quiet acceptance, like the air before dawn. The world outside moved on, cars rushing past, laughter echoing from distant streets, life unfolding like it always did. But inside that small foundation office, two people stood at the center of something larger than themselves, a promise born from tragedy, rebuilt from truth. She rested her head lightly against his shoulder, whispering, "I think my father would have liked you now." He smiled, his voice barely audible. "Then maybe I'm finally someone worth liking." And under the hum of the city, surrounded by the heartbeat of everything they had lost and rebuilt, Alexander and Lila stood together, not as billionaire and bartender, not as sinner and savior, but as two souls finally free from pretending. Morning light filtered through the windows of the small cafe on the corner of Orchard and Fifth, where the smell of cinnamon and roasted coffee beans wrapped the air in quiet nostalgia. Lila pushed open the door, her heart thrumming softly, the tiny bell chiming like a familiar echo from another life. The place hadn't changed much since that night years ago when everything had begun a worn brick wall. The same cracked leather booths, the same rain-streaked window, where a billionaire once whispered, "Pretend you're my date tonight." But everything else had. The world knew their story now, though not the romanticized version the media wanted. It knew of a man who fell from power and rose with purpose, and a woman who turned her grief into grace. She ordered 2 coffees, 1 black one with milk and sugar, and took the same corner seat. The city outside pulsed with early traffic, the rhythm of lives moving on. She smiled, tracing the rim of her cup when the bell rang again. "You're early," came his voice, low and warm. Alexander stepped inside, wind-tousled and smiling, a little older now but lighter, like someone who had finally made peace with the ghosts of his past. "Habit," she said, rising to meet him. "You always made me wait." "You're welcome," he teased, and the sound of her laugh made the barista glance over and smile without knowing why. He sat across from her, setting a small paper bag on the table. "What's that?" she asked. "Proof I've learned something about small gestures." She peeked inside and found 2 mint chocolates wrapped in foil. Her breath caught the memory rushing back his car, their first conversation. Her words, "I don't care how expensive dessert is. Nothing beats mint chocolate after a long day." She looked up, her eyes glistening. "You remembered." "I never forgot," he said softly. "That's what loving you feels like. Remembering everything that matters and finally letting go of what doesn't." They sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee, the world moving outside, but time slowing around them. So she said, "What are you?" "Now ex-CEO, reformed sinner, full-time redemption project." He chuckled. "Just a man who finally knows who he is." "And who's that?" "Someone who learned that power means nothing if it doesn't heal." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught again, the kind that came from recognition rather than surprise. "Alexander." He opened it. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, a single diamond set in gold. Engraved on the inner band were the words, "For all the times we pretended, and this one that's real." Her eyes filled before she could stop them. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but I want to. Because every version of us, the lie, the truth, the pain, led me here." The cafe had gone quiet, sunlight warming the wooden floor between them. He reached across the table, his voice trembling slightly. "Lila, I don't want to spend another lifetime proving I'm worth forgiveness. I just want to spend this one earning your love." She covered her mouth, laughing through her tears. "You really are terrible at casual conversation." "That's why I need you," he said, smiling. "You remind me to be human." She stood, taking his hands, the ring still glinting between them. "You were never a monster," she said softly. "Just a man trying to find his way back." "So will you walk beside me now?" he asked. Not as penance, but as choice. "Always," she whispered, slipping the ring onto her finger. The cafe erupted into quiet applause from the few patrons who had witnessed the scene. Strangers smiling at the beauty of something so simple and true. They sat again, laughter mingling with the hum of morning life. A small voice suddenly broke through the moment. Auntie Lila, a little girl in a pink dress, ran toward their table, waving something shiny. Uncle Alexander dropped his wallet again. He laughed, scooping her up as she climbed onto his lap. "You always find me out, don't you?" "Mommy says I'm a detective," the girl said proudly. "Then you're the best kind," he said, handing her one of the mint chocolates. Lila smiled, watching them, her chest full in a way she hadn't felt since childhood, a fullness made of peace, of knowing that love could grow in the ruins and still bloom strong. Outside, the morning brightened. Walter, Lila's father's old friend, stood across the street, watching quietly through the glass. His lips curved into a small, proud smile as he whispered to himself, "She didn't choose the richest man. She chose the one who saw her and never let go." Inside, Lila leaned against Alexander's shoulder, her ring catching the sunlight. "You know," she said softly, "for all our pretending, I think this is the first time everything feels real." He kissed the top of her head. "That's because it is." The cafe bell chimed again as another customer entered, and for a fleeting second, everything felt perfectly ordinary, and that was the miracle. Because in a world obsessed with perfection, they had found love in imperfection, redemption in truth, and a home in each other. As the camera of life zoomed out through the window, past the street, beyond the city, the sound of laughter echoed, and the red thread of destiny, once torn, now gleamed whole again. Tying two hearts together, not by chance, but by choice. Maybe we don't meet the right person at the right time. Maybe we meet them when our hearts are tired enough to finally recognize something real. Maybe love doesn't come wrapped in perfection or timing or fairy tale logic. It comes quietly in the middle of chaos when you least expect it and most need it. Because love isn't about finding someone flawless. It's about seeing someone's broken edges and realizing they fit yours. When Alexander whispered, "Pretend you're my date tonight," he wasn't asking for help. He was asking for a lifeline. And Lila didn't know it yet, but by saying yes, she wasn't pretending. She was beginning to heal both of them. Maybe that's what true connection is. Two lost souls choosing, even for one night, to stop running. The red thread between them wasn't made of luck or destiny. It was made of mercy. The mercy of a girl who once knelt by a bleeding stranger, and the mercy of a man who finally learned to kneel before the truth. The world called it scandal drama, a billionaire's redemption arc. But it was never about headlines, it was about humanity. About what happens when a person with everything learns the value of one act of kindness, and when a person with nothing learns that her kindness was never small. We live in a world that forgives power, but rarely forgives sincerity. Yet Lila forgave not because he deserved it, but because she needed to free herself from hate. And Alexander rebuilt not to impress her, but to become the man her compassion believed he could be. Would you forgive someone who once destroyed your world? If they came back rebuilt not for you, but because of you, would you open your heart again to the same person who broke it? If you knew they'd spent years stitching their soul back together with your memory, as thread love at its truest isn't blind, it sees everything and still chooses to stay. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain, it transforms it into wisdom. That's what the Red Thread Foundation was built on, the idea that what once hurt us can someday help someone else survive. Maybe that's the real redemption, turning guilt into grace and heartbreak into a place where others can heal. Look around you, maybe someone in your life is waiting for a second chance, or maybe you are. Maybe this story isn't just about them. Maybe it's about all of us learning to love better, slower and truer. Because the world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs more people who dare to start again after everything falls apart. So tell me, where are you watching from tonight? From a quiet porch in Texas, a high-rise in Chicago, a tiny apartment in Brooklyn where the rain hums against the glass. Wherever you are, know this: someone out there is carrying your kind of hope, your kind of hurt, your kind of courage. And maybe, just maybe, your story is waiting to collide with theirs, the way Lila's collided with Alexander's in a moment that feels like chance, but is really grace. If this story touched you, leave a heart in the comments. Tell me what part of you still believes in second chances. Subscribe to Emma's Stories, because here, every story reminds us that love doesn't end when the lights fade. It begins when truth finally takes its first breath. And maybe that's the point of every heartbreak, every redemption, every whisper in the dark, to teach us that even after everything, love still finds a way to come home.